Hi, my name is Dennis Doherty. I'm from the Anti-Bases campaign, and as you know, the bases form the basis of this spying. And we've watched this issue very intimately, and we've taken the trouble to listen to Media Watch, and every academic, every journalist, every unionist, you know, the MEAA, the Journalists Union, who have spoken out against this metadata retention. We wrote to them and we said, would you put your name to a campaign to bring Glenn Greenwald out, who is the expert on all this spying? No reply. A few weeks later we wrote to them, the same people again, and we said, look, it's too late now to bring out Glenn. Would you donate to $400 towards a postcard campaign? No reply. So what I'm saying is that while this campaign has got everyone worried, there are no instruments to campaign against it for the ordinary punter. And the lawyers, the academics, have let us down. And the journalists as well. And that's what I'd like you to comment on that.
What about the Labor Party?
Yeah.
What indeed. The basis is, of course, and you're quite right to raise it, one of the big sleepers underneath this whole thing. Now, because of the nature of our topic tonight, I think Steve and I both felt that we had plenty to concentrate on. But fundamental to the entire thing is the presence of those bases and what they do. And, you know, we don't need to go through all that because it's familiar to all of you. But as long as we are complicit in the invigilation of data that they enable, and we go on paying for it and letting it happen and letting the product of that go to the Five Eyes partners, then we get what we have to expect. You know, this is it. But there's also, as I think you're perhaps suggesting, a kind of a code of silence in the mainstream media about this, unless there is sort of something filmable on television, like people getting on buses and driving to Alice Springs or something like that, something sort of dramatic. Protests against the bases have been going on for years and years and years, and it isn't for them a new story, but it also isn't a story they want to touch. Because I think, in spite of their public presentation, they're complicit in the whole thing. A lot of them are. And not necessarily, well, not necessarily individual journalists, but some of the management are certainly on board with all of that. And you only have to look at what took place under the Gillard government, where not only did we allow the functions of the bases to be extended, but we then offered, and indeed, you know, virtually pleaded for the United States to put troops on the ground in Darwin. And once you've got bases with human beings in them, then even more than the intelligence bases that we've got, you've got those bases as well, which make us a target for any enemy that wants to attack the United States for whatever reason. Not Australia, but the United States, which means that we've got no independence in our foreign policy, not that we've ever had any, but we've got even less than we ever had. Because we Labour, handed it to them on a plate. And nobody has stopped this happening, and the only significant person who's come out loudly and clearly and written cogently about this is Malcolm Fraser. And Malcolm Fraser's book has dropped like a virtual stone. And nobody in Canberra will touch it. No mainstream journalist will pick it up and say, hey, what you are proposing, which is to shut down the bases ASAP, is radical, and to marginalise the ANZUS alliance, not destroy it, but set it to one side, is radical policy No one has picked this up. And I must say I feel for Fraser. He's, you know, he's got a checkered career, and we all know that, but he's tried on something that's really, really fundamental, as you know, to make a change. And what's happening? The mainstream media won't touch it with a voucher.
Yeah, hi, Brian Concan. You're talking about democracy. I think Australia's got no democracy as long as we've got the corrupt Murdoch press brainwashing the sheeple what party to vote for, like they did for Tony Abbott. It's a shame. Talking about metadata, I believe the war on terror is bogus and it's all manufactured terrorism. Do you believe that metadata is really aimed at whistleblowers and activists who expose the corruption of the One World Government, New World Order agenda?
I'm not sure that I understand the question, but the answer is probably yes, but it could be no. It depends. Look, we all have our own favourite conspiracy theories, but I don't think really we need to go to conspiracy theories to understand how dangerous the present situation is. It should be obvious to everybody who's educated in the basics of what a free society and a democracy is, that what is going on at the moment threatens the very fundamentals of it. Now, it may be, for at the moment, the majority of the population's asleep about the risks. But when they wake up to understand that they have lost the freedoms which they had assumed they had, then it's going to be really, really difficult.
Just to add to that, not to disagree, but you mentioned the Murdoch media. I had one sort of happy moment the other day when an old journo friend said to me, you know what, the day Rupert Murdoch dies, the Australian folds. That day. Because he funds it. It loses money like mad. And that will be it. Unfortunately, we'll still have the Daily Telegraph and a few other lovely things. However, there may be life in about 20 years' time.
There will be a very big campaign. It's already beginning to grow and grow and grow. And that is the campaign of activists, and we've had many meetings here at Pollock's in the Pub, against the Trans-Pacific Trading Program. Now, as that gathers steam, as it dawns on more and more Australians, what that actually means in terms of basic things like our pharmaceuticals are at a fair price, they're cheaper than what the Americans have to pay, and the American companies will have the right, this is just one example, to actually sue the Australian government if we're actually paying for our pharmaceuticals, which is a big part of our budget, at a fair price. As the activism grows, do you think that that type of American surveillance will be really give focus to the activists who will grow stronger and stronger and bigger of opposition to those aspects of the Trans-Pacific Trading Partner?
Yeah, that's an interesting connection. I hadn't thought of it, I must say. I was talking at the break to my former colleague from Macquarie, Dr. Andrew Mack, who's here and knows much more about the Trans-Pacific Partnership than I do, although we were both sharing our alarm at the nature of the thing, which even the Americans are objecting to, and if they're objecting to it, it must be worse for us. But it's an echo, as you would know, from the old multilateral agreement on investment, which they tried to get through, which was to do all exactly the same kinds of things that you've just described and more. And this one is their second bite at the same thing, and they're trying to get it through again. And I must say, you know, the best news I've had today was the news that Australia is now considering joining the Chinese equivalent, not equivalent, but at least, which at least gives us something to oppose it with, which is the way we ought to be doing our policy. Not all our eggs in that basket, but if we're going to have some in there, we've got to have some in there too. But to come back to your point about connecting it with the intelligence stuff, it wouldn't at all surprise me, since you mention it, and I'm just sort of thinking off the top of my head, that while we always tend to focus on the politics of this invigilation stuff, nevertheless, the economic intelligence is of great importance and huge value to the people who own it and can get hold of it. And that's why they scrape up everything they can, because they can find out what people are doing in business, they can find out what their plans are for the future, what the cost of this and that are going to be and so on, and use it to their own advantage, which of course is just as important as knowing what guns and tanks they've got. So I wouldn't be in the least surprised. But the TPP isn't going to change that, because the scooping up of intelligence goes on all the time. And whether we have or don't have a TPP, they'll still be collecting all of our data, all about business, all about anything else, anything at all. And it's just what the uses they turn it to that's the problem.
Again, it's an interesting idea that I hadn't turned my mind to, but there must be some natural pressures as the political expression of free societies is bent to the interests of global corporates, that there will be pressures on the security agencies to bend to the will of the corporate pressures as well. And, you know, I can certainly recognise that there are risks that national security and global enterprise will one day start to conceptually merge.
My question is on the efficiency of the organisation. Some time back, you'll remember that the new headquarters in Canberra, terrorist Taj Mahal, I call it, was infiltrated by the Chinese. You remember this?
Yes.
Now, my question is, just think about the efficiency. How much has the organisation cost us over the years, and just what have they done? Who have they arrested? Who have they shut up? I think the problem is efficiency. Could you comment on the cost of the organisation, and what do they call it, cost effectiveness of the organisation?
I think, on the whole, they got away with what otherwise would have been a major scandal. I mean, there is that Taj Mahal, as you say. I drove past it yesterday, and there it is, gleaming, shining in the sun. Jugala, the architect of Parliament House, hates it because it's sort of at an angle from Parliament House and distracts from the symmetry of the impact of his creation. And there it is, this gleaming thing, which, and I didn't bring with me the figures you're asking for, but it cost heaps, plus also the exponential increase in cost of ASIO over the last few years has just been horrendous. You wouldn't believe we had a budget crisis if you would look at what they've gone on putting into ASIO. And I can't fulfill your curiosity about that, and I'm sorry. But if you give me an email, I'll let you have it. And there it is. They are now, I believe, in it. But this was done without any hoo-ha. You know, the opening of the great building? No. They just crept in and they set up their thing and they started business. But it is a crying shame. Now, may I just say that it is not alone of its kind. When the United States built a new embassy in Moscow a few years ago, the whole thing was bugged from top to bottom. They had to pull the whole thing down and start again. Whether they got Russian workmen the next time or where they got the workmen from, I don't know. How the Chinese managed to bug the ASIO headquarters is such a wonderful story, and it's something that any young journalist worth their salt should be doing, and probably has done, but has probably been told by their MSA bosses, their mainstream media bosses, oh, sorry mate, you know, nudge, nudge, we're not allowed to talk about that. Because otherwise someone has to have done it. I mean, they have to have done it, this work, this project. And yet, it's our money, and we're not allowed to hear about it. Isn't this a scandal? I think so.
Look, I would have thought there's somebody in this room somewhere who would be able to comment from an internal point of view on how efficient the organisation is.
If they're not efficient, then there must be somebody in this room from ASIO. Put your hand up. Come on, don't be afraid.
Normally the last ones to stay, but you know, of course, one of their most inefficient activities is physically infiltrating organisations, and they have a long and dishonourable history of doing that relatively ineffectively, and indeed there is the usual apocryphal story that some organisations that were dwindling in membership, the only remaining members were ASIO officers who couldn't identify themselves to each other. Let's hope that never happens to politics in the pub. But look, you can probably work out from the fact that ASIO's budget has been increasing at an exponential rate for the last 15 years, never been subject to the kind of public service disciplines that every other agency is subject to, not subject to efficiency dividends and all of that kind of stuff. It must be now a bloated organisation which is heavy on internal inefficient practices, and it's costing us a disproportionately larger amount for what legitimate security it provides, and of course what we know is a lot of what it's doing is actually undermining true security and freedom.
Well, first I'd like to comment on Wynne and Stephen's comments about you know, getting the people agitated about this and getting active. All I can say is, because I'm active at the moment in the upcoming New South Wales state election campaign, and I can tell you, there are people out there, even in Balmain, the seat of Balmain, who say to me, oh, is it Saturday week, really? So, good luck with that one is all I can say. Honestly, when you prompt them, what are the issues on your mind? You're lucky if you get one out of them. And that's in an educated community. So heaven help the communities who are... Yeah, the ferry terminal. Oh, yes. No, the cruise terminal, Stephen. The cruise terminal. So, so I think I want to believe that once people find out what's going on, we'll all get active. But really, I'm thinking it's when the environment collapses under us that we'll finally get the message, as it is right now, except we don't talk about that either. But I think when the water turns brown in our taps, that's when we'll start to think about our place in the universe. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask the most naive of questions. Why did Labor roll over so easily? Go on, tell me.
Shame, Labor.
Do you know what? No, I'm not privy to those kinds of conversations or that kind of information. You know, for some reason, Civil Liberties is on the nose with the Labor Party. Even Tanya Plibersek, whose office somewhere around here, has been a place where traditionally Civil Liberties can utilise the facilities, and they'll provide a lot of assistance. But she's pretty much blatantly anti-Civil Liberties now, and so are most of them in Parliament, and they don't want to open up the discussion to true political debate. They want to argue on trivial things and not on the important things. And it's inexplicable, because if there was true leadership there, I think there is a debate to be opened up and won. And while ever they don't do it, the Greens are just going to prevent them from ever getting true victory. Well, the Greens are going to take away, that, as they have done, that 12%, 13%, 15% of the left-wing part of the community that are interested in true freedoms, not interested in political power for power's sake. And we saw from the Gillard government, I think, that when the Greens hold Labor accountable, it makes it too difficult to do deals to maintain power, and it's writing Labor out of the electoral process. I think they need to win back that side of politics for themselves. They're never going to get it from the right.
My questions overlaps a bit with the metadata. I noticed in today's Sydney Morning Herald there's this thing where people are now being able to vote electronically, and please give us a break, mate. The most recent train union elections, according to one of the rank and file journals, the Sparks newsletter, has been fairly significantly rigged. And there is a suggestion underway and a survey being undertaken that the Australian Electoral Commission will be conducting all trade union elections in the future electronically, which will enable them to delete, instead of having to stuff ballot boxes when scrutineers aren't there to for the rank and file ticket to see that the votes not tallying up, because the scrutineers have been told to go home at lunchtime, and then 500 ballot papers mysteriously appear into the ballot boxes because perhaps someone from the Electoral Commission's got a link with the printing company that prints the ballot papers. I don't know, but electronically they'll just be able to hit a button and wipe out all the rank and file ticket candidates if they get to, because they control all the trade union elections now, and then the federal and state elections and local government elections will soon be put on notice that they'll be conducted electronically. How is this going to overlap with the metadata thing? You know, I mean, ASIO is obviously involved in the more scandalously with the trade union elections, but once it becomes federal, we're going to have the CIA running our elections, given the company that prints the Opal bus train tickets, where all the universities have given off the private names and addresses of all their students to, is an affiliate or a subsidiary of the NSA. So, you know, like, where are we going with all this electronic stuff with elections and information and that?
Good. Everything's becoming rigged.
Well, of course, we all want the convenience of what the electronic world offers us. We all want the ability to communicate by email, by social media, to vote online. What we have to, well, what the government has to understand is that in order to provide that, there has to be a legal system which supports people's privacy and makes a serious offence for any interference with that. The issue. I'll give a plug for Channel 9 News on Sunday night, where there's going to be a segment. This is a news program, of course, but it's already been pre-recorded. A segment on the Wi-Fi systems in shopping centres. And if you go, I never go to shopping centres. Perhaps some of you do. If you go to your shopping centre, you might be offered free Wi-Fi while you're in the centre, and of course you will not hesitate to log into that, provide your email address, perhaps your name, date of birth and some other personal details. And the consequence of that, of course, is that the shopping centre owner gathers all your data while you're in the centre, tracks you via the GPS, and you know, when you're standing in front of the fridges in Harvey Normal, send you ads about the fridges in Harvey Normal, and so on. Right. So, I mean, all of this electronic stuff, which offers fabulous convenience and advances, has got to be regulated. And but it's conceptually no different, I think, to regulating paper elections voting systems. That is, you know, just as there had to be supervision of the physical ballot boxes, there has to be appropriate supervision of the electronic systems and appropriate legal protections and so forth. But I fear at the moment that the technology is moving ahead of the protections.
Just to add to that, I mean, there really ought not, as Steve says, there ought not to be any difference between voting on paper and voting electronically. There's nothing sort of spooky or strange about that. And controlling it and looking after it, as the Electoral Commission should do, is ought to be seamless. But you remember what took place in Western Australia, where they lost a whole lot of votes, and that was seriously worrying. And now, I mean, I have electronically voted already, because I was living in Canberra, and still am, sort of thing. Well, I seem to be here. And I see that I and about 19,000 other New South Wales residents have voted for a ballot paper that didn't include all the parties. Did you see that today?
Yes.
Right. Now, you know, this is not, it's not a technological thing, it's an administrative thing, and somebody isn't doing their job properly. Whatever technology they're using, it doesn't matter. They've got to show all the parties, for God's sake, either on paper or online. There should be no difference. And this is, it seems to me, as much of an error as took place in Western Australia. And I only want to add this chilling thought, that if you look up the 14 qualifications of fascism, the last of them is the manipulation of elections. And that's the only one, 13 I think there are, that's the only one in my count for which Australia has up to now not qualified, and now we do. So it's a bit of a worry, particularly in the light of what Steve was talking about the trend in which we are moving towards controlling what people do, think, say, and are. And just have a look. It's really worrying.
It seemed to me some words have practically disappeared from the dictionary. I mean, it's quite okay to accuse an individual about terrorism, but the expression state-sponsored terrorism is no longer on site, you know, and yet it's all over the place in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, many countries are subject to state-sponsored terrorism. I would like to thank the panel for making the connection between our privacy and wars, and manufactured wars, because very often the two are not connected in mainstream media. So yes, my point is, what happened to state-sponsored terrorism? Is it happening, or is it done under a new name?
Well, look, I'm going to get straight in there. I condemn state-sponsored terrorism. Let there be no mistake. Can I ask whether anybody else in the room wants to join me in condemning state-sponsored terrorism? Yes, very good. Right, so I think we've got around the potential problem with that question. Yes, it's an interesting one. Of course, 1984 tells us that it's the state of fear that remains, it's just the cause that changes. And I think that's just a very good reminder of of that premise.
My question regards the around the topic of the personnel, I guess, of ASIO. Of course, we know that there's anonymity about working for ASIO and so on, but I presume that most people who work for ASIO, increasing numbers, of course, as we mentioned with the budget and so on, would have entered ASIO probably through doing the what's it called, the public service graduate recruitment service. So my question is, I was curious about what kind of, if that's where most of the graduates come from, what kind of university background, first of all, and most people who enter the service are coming from, and any other demographic things like gender and ethnicity and age and things like that. Is any of that information known about these people who are spying on us?
I can't tell you all of those details because I don't know them. I would if I could. But it probably, that kind of information should probably be publicly available. If you looked it up and sort of checked on their database, there probably would be some statistics that they would provide about that. But from what I do know, and I know a lot of ASIO people and ACES people and so on, and they move in and out, right, of each other's organisations. Like, they are part of the deep state, although the deep state is even deeper than that. But what I do know about them is they would pass in, many of them would pass in the street for, you know, people like you and me. Some of them have particular capacities, like language, for instance. And language is a very important thing, and if they didn't have that, we'd be critical of them for not having it, wouldn't we? You know, if they're supposed to be doing a job and they don't have people with Arabic, they don't have people with Chinese, etc., then why don't they? So if they're there and they're supposed to be doing this job, then they ought to have those capacities. And my understanding is that they do, and they try very hard to keep on printing it, although, as Steve says, they have got so much money and they are so little subject to scrutiny or justification of their expenditure and so on, that by now, or in the last, shall we say, the last 15 years, they must by now have become pretty bloated. And may I say, unself-critical? I mean, I detect that even from friends and what they say, that you can go so far in a conversation, but up to that point, they'll be frank with you, and then after that, the curtain comes down, and the curtain says, well, you wouldn't know about that, would you? We know, but you don't know. That's the status thing. See, if you're in the knowledge game, knowledge is power. And if you collect secret knowledge, then your secret knowledge of it, and the more of it that you have personally as an employee of the organisation, the greater status you have in the organisation. It only follows. It follows everywhere. It would be the same in the NSA in the United States, the same everywhere. The higher you rise in the organisation, it's like a cult, right? You know, if you join a cult, the longer you're in the organisation, the closer you get to the Holy of Holies, which is the cult leader. Now, ASIO is not a cult in that sense, but it's a cult in the sense that you get admitted through various sort of invisible doors to more and more knowledge of what there is to know. And when you get to the very topmost top, then you know what there is to be known and how we know it. Whereas these sort of junior recruits don't get to be shown that. It's pathetic, I realise, but this is public service, you know. The whole public service runs on this, and the security service most of all.
Oh, that was a very good answer. A couple of observations. As I understand it, one essential aspect of ASIO recruits is that they not have social media presence. And So for students at university who've got extensive Facebook or other social media profiles, that probably makes them ineligible to join. But as a question that I think is worth posing is, what is going to be more prestigious in the future? Is it going to be Department of Foreign Affairs, or is it going to be ASIO or ACES?
Listen, it's already a lay down there. DFAT lost its prestige years ago. DFAT is no longer a policy department, it's a process department.